My son said it so casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. "You're not a priority anymore, Mom." Just like that. No hesitation, no guilt, no trace of what I had been to him for 45 years. I stood frozen by the kitchen counter, a tray of homemade lasagna still warm in my hands. I had made it for them, for him, his wife, the kids. The smell of it filled the air, comforting and familiar, yet suddenly I had no idea what to do with it. They didn't know I was there. I had let myself in the way I always used to. I still had my spare key, though something deep inside me whispered that I wouldn't for much longer. Their voices drifted in from the living room, low, quick, careless. "Your mom is too much," Sandra said, her voice tight with irritation. "Dropping by unannounced, bringing food we didn't ask for. It's like she wants to move in." "I know," Jeff replied, "but I've told her she's not a priority anymore. We've got our own life. She needs to back off." Not a priority. Not busy, not overwhelmed, just not important. For a moment, I wasn't sure my knees would hold me up. I quietly stepped back, opened the front door, and slipped outside, making sure it closed without a sound. The lasagna, I left it on the front steps. The drive home was silent. No music, no radio. Just the sound of my breathing and the faint creak of the old Volvo, the same car Jeff had begged me for 12 years ago when he went off to college. Of course, I bought it, just like everything else. Back in my kitchen, I made myself a cup of tea. The kettle whistled like it always had. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I sat at the small round table, the one with the chipped edge, and stared at the wall. Photographs covered it. Jeff at 4, grinning with missing front teeth. Jeff at his high school graduation, my hand firmly on his shoulder. Our family trip to Cape Cod, 1996. Every moment, mine. Every sacrifice, mine. Every memory, mine. I raised him alone. His father left when Jeff was 10. I never blamed the boy. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I saved for his education, helped with his first mortgage, watched his children when Sandra went back to work. I never asked for anything in return. Not a thank you, not a card, not even a proper seat at Christmas dinner. But I never imagined I would become invisible. I didn't cry that night, not yet. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept my financial files. I hadn't looked at them in months, maybe years. Old check stubs, bank statements, a folder labeled Jeffrey, his name written in my careful cursive. I began flipping through. Private school fees, summer camps, orthodontist bills, the down payment for their house. Over $180,000. I stopped. I had never seen it that way before. I didn't give him money. I gave him peace of mind, freedom, opportunity. And now I wasn't even a priority. I didn't sleep. I moved from chair to window and back again. I thought about every small humiliation I had swallowed for the sake of family. Sandra avoiding my eyes, the children forgetting my birthday unless Facebook reminded them, Jeff no longer hugging me, not really. I thought about my will. My house wasn't much, but it was paid off. I had some investments, a pension, nothing extravagant, but enough to matter, especially to people like Jeff, people who always needed something. But I wasn't a priority, so maybe it was time I made some changes. Quiet ones, the way I always had, only this time, not for them, for me. I woke early the next morning, no alarm needed. The words were already there, echoing before my feet touched the floor. You're not a priority anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching sunlight stretch across the carpet. It used to feel peaceful. Now it only revealed dust in the corners and how thin my patience had become. I made coffee, not the kind Jeff and Sandra drink, just instant. A teaspoon, boiled water, a splash of milk. The mug warmed my hands, but nothing else. I walked to my mother's old secretary desk. Inside was a brown envelope, my emergency list. Not really for emergencies, just Records. I laid everything out. $3,200, car loan co-signed. $11,000, Sandra's certification. $7,850, braces for Madison. $5,000, Jeff's failed business. $28,000, house down payment. $9,600, school fees over 4 years. And that was only what I wrote down. There were groceries, gas cards, birthday money from Santa. Each time I told myself, this is what family does. This is what love looks like. But love, I was finally learning, has another side. The mail arrived mid-morning. Among the envelopes, a glossy invitation. You're invited. Sandra's business launch event. I didn't laugh. I didn't tear it. I simply slid it under the newspaper and walked away. By noon, I needed air. The park was quiet. A few joggers, a couple with a dog, ducks gliding lazily across the pond. I sat on a bench, the same bench where Jeff took his first steps. I remembered his tiny arms reaching for me, his laughter when he fell into my embrace. I had cried that day, overwhelmed with joy. Now, I sat in the same place, feeling something closer to grief. When I got home, I called the bank. I'd like to pause my automatic transfers, I said calmly, and review the power of attorney on my accounts. The man on the line listed them off. Utilities, tuition, insurance. All of them, I said. He hesitated. All of them? Yes. A pause. Do you need time to reconsider? I've been reconsidering for years, I replied softly. I'm just acting now. When I hung up, something had shifted. Not peace, not yet, but something stronger. That evening, I opened the file labeled Will and Estate. Tomorrow, I would call my lawyer. The office hadn't changed. Wood-paneled walls, framed certificates, a ticking clock that made silence feel heavier. I want to update my will, I said. I want to remove my son as primary beneficiary and create a trust for my granddaughter, Lucy. He paused. Is this recent? It's been a long time coming, I said. We worked through everything. Details, clauses, options, clinical, clean, respectful. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a person. Lucy, 18, kind, gentle, present, the only one who visited without being asked, the only one who listened, really listened. Remove Jeffrey from power of attorney, I said. You sure? I'm sure. On the way home, I stopped at a bakery, bought myself a peach tart, something small, something just for me. I sat on the porch eating slowly, watching children ride past, and for a moment, I wasn't just a mother, not just a provider, not just someone needed. I was Lynette. The phone rang at 6 p.m. Jeff. Hey, Mom, are you free this weekend? Maybe brunch? Lucy will be there. Careful voice, rehearsed. They knew. Something had changed. I'll let you know, I said. A pause. Is everything okay? I think so. You sound different. I feel different. We hung up. I placed the phone back down slowly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be chosen. That night, I didn't sleep. But it wasn't the old kind of sleeplessness, the restless, heavy kind that left you drained by morning. This was different, clearer, quieter, almost purposeful. I spent the small hours sorting through things I hadn't touched in years. Photo albums, notebooks, letters Jeff had written back when he was in college, back when he still needed me. One letter, creased and softened with time, caught my attention. Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done this without you. I traced the words with my fingertips, remembering the boy who had written them, and wondering when exactly he had disappeared. At some point, I pulled out the sweater I'd been knitting, pale blue, for Lucy. She had picked the yarn herself during one of our quiet walks downtown. I hadn't touched it in months. By dawn, the left sleeve was finished. Saturday arrived with pale sunlight and an unexpected knock at the door. I wasn't dressed yet, still in my robe, hair loosely pinned, the kettle just beginning to whistle. I opened the door a crack, expecting a neighbor or misdelivered mail. It was Lucy. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly, holding up a brown paper bag. "I brought scones, fig and walnut." I stepped back without a word and let her in. She moved through the kitchen the way she always had, light-footed, familiar. She set the bag down, opened cupboards without asking, placed plates on the counter, found the butter. I liked that about her. She didn't ask if she could help. She simply did. We sat at the kitchen table while steam curled from our tea into the quiet morning air. "I heard," she said after a pause. "I didn't ask what," I replied. "Jeff came home yesterday fuming. Something about you freezing the accounts, overstepping. He was pacing like someone had stolen his keys." I took a slow sip of tea. "He kept saying it wasn't fair, that you didn't tell him, that you were being dramatic." I looked at her. "Do you think I'm being dramatic?" Lucy broke a stone in half, thoughtful. "I think you're being overdue." I smiled then, really smiled. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "I'm glad you finally did it, Grandma. You've given them enough. Dad doesn't see it, but I do. All of it. The rides, the tuition, the groceries, the way you were always on call for their lives." Something rose in my throat. "I always thought," she added gently, "that if you disappeared one day, they wouldn't notice right away, but the bills would." She said it without cruelty, just truth. The silence stretched between us. Then I asked softly, "Are you ashamed of me?" Her head snapped up. "What?" "Jeff said I'm not a priority anymore, that I'm too involved, too much." I paused. "Sometimes I wonder if I've made myself ridiculous, giving so much, expecting something back." Lucy's eyes filled, not with pity, but something fierce. "You're not ridiculous, you're rare." The kettle clicked off. I stood to make fresh tea, needing the movement. My hands still trembled slightly, but it was steadier now, manageable. Lucy stayed until noon. We didn't talk about money again. We talked about her sweater, her classes, a boy she liked, Jonas, a music major who wore too many rings but made her laugh. When she left, I stood at the window and watched her walk down the street. She turned once and waved. That small gesture filled me more than 100 polite brunches ever could. The rest of the day passed slowly. Laundry, clean sheets, watering the hydrangeas. Then, sometime after 4, I remembered. Tomorrow was Sandra's birthday. I used to plan for it every year. Flowers, always lilies, a gift certificate to her favorite skincare place. One year, I even baked her favorite cake from scratch, despite the arthritis in my hands. This year, I hadn't bought a thing, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I wondered if they'd notice, if they'd call, if they'd ask whether I'd forgotten, and if they did, whether they'd understand that I hadn't forgotten at all. I had simply chosen not to act. At 7 p.m., the phone rang. I didn't answer. At 7:30, it rang again. Then a text. "Hi, Mom. Just wondering if you're feeling okay. Sandra sends her love." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened an old notebook. Pages filled with grocery lists, half-written thoughts. One line stood alone from last winter. "They only love the part of me that gives." I stared at it for a long time. Then, beneath it, I wrote, "Let them learn to love the part that doesn't." Sunday morning arrived with a soft breeze carrying the scent of cut grass through the open window. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, slicing an apple. The house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. The kind of quiet that felt like a clean page. By noon, 3 more messages from Jeff. "Mom, did you get my message? Sandra's wondering if you're okay. Call when you have a moment." Not a single mention of her birthday. Just concern. Carefully worded, suspiciously timed. At 2:25, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole. Jeff. I opened the door without hesitation. He stood there with that familiar mix of confidence and discomfort, his brow slightly furrowed like he'd rehearsed what he wanted to say. "Hi." "Hi." I was in the neighborhood. Of course he was. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in like someone who knew the space, but no longer belonged to it. "You've been quiet," he said, sitting at the table. "I've had a lot to think about." He cleared his throat. "Look, if this is about what I said—" "It is, but not just that." He blanked. "It's about years of giving," I continued, "of showing up, paying, organizing, bending backwards to be useful, and slowly watching myself disappear." He leaned back, arms loosely crossed. "I didn't do it to be owed, but somewhere deep down, I believed love would make room for me." He stared at a small chip in the table. "Sandra's been tense," he muttered. "I understand that. I've understood that every year since you were born." His jaw tightened. "When you told her I'm not a priority anymore, you weren't saying something new. You were naming something that's been growing for a long time." Silence. "You wanted to know why I froze the accounts," he said. He looked up. "It's because I needed to find out what part of our relationship exists without them." "And?" he asked quietly. I held his gaze. "We're about to find out." We sat in a silence that wasn't awkward, just full. "You were telling me about changing your will," he said. "Yes." "And you gave Lucy the trust." "Yes." "She's young." "She knows enough to show up, enough to ask how I am without asking for anything." He suddenly stood up. "Okay," he said. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "Jeff," I said gently, "you did." He looked at me differently then, not as a son looks at his mother, but as a man looks at someone he doesn't fully understand. "I'll call you," he said. "You always say that." He hesitated at the door. "Can I still come by?" "Of course, as my son, not as my dependent." He nodded and left. When the door closed, I sat still for a long time. My tea had gone cold. I didn't reheat it. The visit hadn't hurt as much as I feared, but it hadn't healed anything either. It had simply clarified. Later that evening, I wrote, "There are wounds that don't bleed. They just reshape you." Monday, I stayed home, not out of exhaustion, but out of choice. I wanted to understand what quiet felt like when it wasn't forced. It rained that morning, a steady, cleansing kind of rain, the kind that makes you light a candle for no reason. So I did. Cinnamon. I brewed tea, not out of habit, but intention. The sweater for Lucy was nearly finished now. At noon, I checked the mailbox. Bills, flyers, junk mail, and one pale blue envelope. Inside, a card. Sandra's handwriting. "Lynette, I'd appreciate a conversation when you're ready regarding recent decisions. I believe misunderstandings have caused damage. I hope we can repair things. Sandra." I read it twice. No apology, no acknowledgement, just misunderstandings. I slid it back into the envelope and tucked it away. Later, Lucy called. "Dad came home really quiet," she said. "He visited," I replied. "He said you're different." "I am." "How?" I paused. I stopped believing that loving someone means losing yourself. There was silence. Then, softly, "I'm glad you didn't lose yourself for me." After we hung up, the house felt different again. Not empty, not heavy, just mine. I lit another candle, opened the window slightly, let the scent of rain and pine drift in. Then I reached for the manila envelope from my lawyer. The trust documents were inside. Final, notarized. I held them for a moment, not like a weapon, but like a shield, because for the first time in a long time, I had something of my own. Not just money, but boundaries, direction, a life that didn't begin with someone else's needs. That night, I pulled down the old shoebox from the top shelf of my closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the letters I had written but never sent. Most were addressed to Jeff, a few were meant for myself, and one was written to the woman I used to be. I unfolded a letter from 2012. Jeff had just taken out a second mortgage back then, and I had quietly stepped in to cover it. The note was simple, almost painfully so. "I hope this helps. I know you're trying. I just want you to know that I see you. I still remember when you couldn't tie your shoes. I'm proud of you. Always. Mom. I read it twice, then folded it carefully, pressing the edges as though sealing a memory back into place. I wasn't sorry for what I had given, not really, but I was finally done believing that giving should have no end. That evening, I wrote a new letter. Not to Jeff, to myself. You were never just a mother. You were a builder, a healer, a compass. They may have forgotten, but you didn't. And now you remember. Let that be enough. I placed it gently on top of the others, closed the box, and set it back in its place. Then I turned off the lights, sat by the open window, and listened to the rain as it whispered against the dark. Tuesday morning arrived with a strange kind of quiet. Not silence, there were birds outside, a distant lawnmower humming, the steady tick of the hallway clock, but inside me there was stillness. Not sadness, not numbness, just calm, the kind that comes when there are no more illusions left to lose. I spent the morning in the sunroom, my favorite place in the house. The garden beyond the windows had grown wild over the years, unruly, tangled, alive. Jeff used to say we'd hire someone to take care of it. We never did. Truthfully, I liked it better this way. I was trimming dead leaves from a fern when the doorbell rang. It wasn't Jeff, it wasn't Lucy, it was Sandra. She stood on the porch in a navy blazer, her posture stiff, her shoes elegant but impractical. In her hand, she held a small white paper bag. "I brought scones," she said quietly, "from that bakery you used to like." I stepped aside without a word. She entered slowly, as if walking into unfamiliar territory. Her eyes moved across the room, not judgmental, just observant. It had been 3 years since her last visit. "I didn't come to argue," she said, placing the bag on the counter. "I thought maybe we could talk." I didn't offer tea. I didn't ask her to sit. "Jeff's been upset. He's trying, but he doesn't always know how." I nodded. "Neither do I." She hesitated, then said, "I read your note, the one with the will documents. Lucy showed me." That caught me by surprise. "She asked me to," she added quickly. "She said I needed to." Silence stretched between us. For the first time, she seemed smaller, or maybe I had simply stopped shrinking. Finally, she said, "I know I haven't made you feel welcome. I was never good at that. I didn't grow up with closeness. I don't really know how to share space with someone who doesn't expect anything." "I did expect something," I replied evenly, "to be included." She lowered her gaze. "That's fair." From her bag, she pulled out a folded note. "I wrote this last night, not because I think a letter fixes anything, but I thought you deserved to see me try." I took it, but didn't open it. Not yet. "I'm sorry," she added now, her voice thinner, "for all the small ways I made you feel less." That stayed with me. For all the small ways. She left soon after. No hugs, no promises, just a quiet exit and a hesitant glance back, as if unsure whether I would call her back or let her go. I let her go, but I didn't forget. Later that afternoon, Lucy came by. She didn't mention Sandra at all. Instead, she sat down, opened a book, and began reading aloud while I finished stitching the last seam of her sweater. By sunset, it was done. She slipped it on, smoothing it over herself with a small smile. "I've never had something made just for me," she said, turning toward the mirror. "It's a little loose," she added. "The way you like it," I replied. She twirled once, then laughed softly. "I look like someone loved me." "You do." She hugged me then, not politely, not briefly, but fully, solidly, as if I were not fragile but steady. When she left, I finally opened Sandra's letter. It was short. "I think I've been afraid of you, of needing you, of being reminded that I didn't build this family alone, that you were always there. And I see now, it wasn't your presence that overwhelmed me, it was your grace, and how little I gave in return. I folded the note slowly. Some truths don't need more words than that. Wednesday, I went to the grocery store like I always did. I stood in the cereal aisle longer than necessary, staring at a box of granola Jeff used to like. I used to buy two, one for me, one for them. This time, I put it back. When I returned home, there was an envelope tucked into the screen door. My name, written in Jeff's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the hall table, beside the lamp he had broken when he was 9 and glued back together with glittery school glue. Instead, I made soup. Potato leek, Lucy's favorite. I chopped slowly, letting the rhythm of the kitchen steady me, the knife against the board, the quiet simmer, the hum of the refrigerator. The house felt awake again. After dinner, I sat at the table and opened the letter. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said and what you didn't. I want to explain, but I know explanations can sound like excuses, and you've had enough of those. He was right. I think I let Sandra's boundaries become my own. I told myself I was protecting you from tension, but really I was protecting my own comfort. I failed you there. I paused but kept reading. I miss being your son. Not just someone who calls twice a month or shows up when he needs something, but really your son. I remember how safe I felt with you. That didn't come from money or meals. It came from you never holding anything back. That line caught me. And I've held everything back in return. I read it again. I want to rebuild something with you. I don't know how yet, but if you'll let me, I'd like to try. Not because I want back what I lost, but because I want to learn how to give the way you did, even if it's late. No signature, no love Jeff, just that, even if it's late. I folded the letter and placed it in the shoebox, not to bury it, but to keep it close. It didn't erase the past, but it cracked the silence. That night, I dreamed of the backyard as it once was. Jeff at 7 chasing fireflies, Lucy, small and bright, clapping when one landed in her hands. I stood on the porch watching. No fences, no distance, just light. Tuesday afternoon, there was another knock. This time, it was Miriam, my neighbor of 30 years, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. I saw someone slip a letter into your door yesterday. Didn't look like junk mail. It wasn't, I replied. She sat at the kitchen table like she had 100 times before. So, she asked. So what? Did he apologize? I raised an eyebrow. You knew? She snorted. We're too old not to recognize the moment our children stop seeing us. I smiled faintly. My son once told me to sell my house and move into an age-appropriate facility. What did you say? I told him, I wiped you for 3 years. You can let me die in my own house. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. She leaned forward, softer now. You did the right thing. I can see it in your eyes. You're not shrinking anymore. And something in me settled. Not validation, recognition. That evening, I went into the backyard. It was wild, yes, but alive. I knelt carefully, clearing space around the lilies pushing stubbornly through the weeds. They came back every year, no matter what. Need help? Lucy stood by the fence, holding 2 mugs of lemonade. We sat on the porch steps as the sun stretched long across the yard. Jeff told me you read the letter, she said. I nodded. He's trying. I know, she replied. Sometimes people start late. I looked at her. Doesn't mean they shouldn't start at all. I hesitated, then asked quietly, Did I give too much? She thought for a moment, then said, You gave what you had. That's not the same thing. We sat in silence until the sky turned gold. Before she left, she kissed my cheek. "You're my blueprint, Grandma." And somehow that mattered more than anything else that week. Tea, the crossword, slippers I never bothered replacing, everything was the same. And yet, something wasn't. The air in the house felt lighter, or maybe it was just me. I hadn't slept well, but I didn't feel tired. There was a quiet current under my skin, something humming. Not anxiety, not restlessness. Something closer to anticipation, or maybe readiness. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Jeff. Again. He stood there with a cautious smile, holding a small paper bag. "Coffee and muffins," he said, "from that place on Sycamore you used to like." "I remembered," I said. He hesitated, then winced slightly. "Lucy reminded me." I stepped aside and let him in. This time he moved differently, slower, more aware, like he was careful not to take up too much space. His eyes drifted across the room, as if expecting something to have changed. Nothing had, but something in him had. "I've been thinking," he said as we sat down, "about how you must have felt these past few years." I didn't interrupt. Some things need to come out in their own shape. "I think I took you for granted. Maybe I thought you'd always be there, and maybe I didn't want to face how much I still needed you." He paused, swallowing. "I know I said you weren't a priority. That was cruel, and it wasn't even true. It was just convenient." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't the boy I raised, but he wasn't quite the man I'd grown distant from either. He was somewhere in between. Trying. "I want to start showing up," he said. "Not for money, not when things fall apart, just because you matter to me." I let the silence stretch. Then I broke the muffin in half. Lemon poppy seed, the same kind I used to bake on Sundays when he was small enough to sit on the counter and swing his legs. "You don't get to make a speech and erase the last decade," I said gently. "I know," he said quickly. "But maybe I can show up again, quietly, repeatedly." I nodded. That's how trust is rebuilt. His eyes glossed over. I poured him tea, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like obligation. We spent the morning talking, not about anything important, and somehow about everything that mattered. The neighbor's new dog, a roof leak he'd been putting off fixing, Lucy's plan to apply for grad school. Ordinary things, soft things. As he reached the door to leave, he stopped. "I know you changed the will," he said. I met his eyes. "I didn't come to ask you to change it back." I raised an eyebrow. "I came to ask if someday, when you're ready, we could talk about what it means to earn a place in it." That stunned me more than any apology. Later, I sat at my desk and opened the drawer. The updated documents were exactly where I'd left them. I didn't touch them, just looked, then closed the drawer again. That evening, I made dinner for one, but I set 2 places, not because I expected anyone, but because I was no longer shrinking to fit an empty chair. Saturday arrived wrapped in sunlight and birdsong, the kind of morning that used to pass me by unnoticed. I sat on the back porch with my coffee wrapped in the blue shawl I hadn't worn since Harold's funeral. For years, I'd kept it buried in a drawer, as if softness was something I wasn't allowed anymore. But today, I wanted it. I wanted to feel held again. Around 10, Lucy arrived carrying a small cardboard box. "Photos," she said, smiling. "For my final project. I figured you'd have the best ones." We sat cross-legged on the living room floor like she was 6 again. She started sorting through the photos. Me holding baby Jeff, Jeff in a Halloween costume 2 sizes too big, Harold in paint-stained jeans beside the old shed. She held up one photo. "Who's this with you?" I leaned closer. "That's Elma. We trained together. She moved away years ago. Arizona, I think." Lucy studied the image. "You look happy." I was tired, but yes, happy. She paused. You were a whole person before Dad and I, huh? I laughed softly. Yes, I was. She nodded slowly. I forget that sometimes. Most people do. That's why you remind them, gently, firmly. After she left, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Old correspondence, letters from Harold, postcards from Elma, thank you notes from Patience. One caught my eye, dated 1989. You sat with my mother when no one else would. You gave her peace. I'll never forget it. I pressed the card to my chest. I had forgotten her, that version of me, the one who wasn't just a mother or a safety net, but a steady hand in someone else's storm. That night, a message from Jeff lit up my phone. Would it be okay if I came by tomorrow morning to help in the garden? I stared at it. Not, can you help me? Not, I need something. Just, can I help you? I replied, bring gloves. The lilies are stubborn this year. Sunday morning came crisp and bright. I was already outside, knees in the dirt, hat shading my face. Jeff pulled up and stepped out with his own gloves. I brought mulch. I figured it was overdue. I nodded towards the fence. We worked side by side. No music, no forced conversation, just quiet effort, the occasional correction. That's not a weed. Careful with the roots. And slowly, we found a rhythm. After a while, I handed him water and sat on the porch step. Remember when you planted carrots and forgot to label them? He laughed. I thought they were weeds and pulled them out. You cried for an hour. You told me they just hadn't sprouted yet. I didn't want you to feel like you'd failed. He sat beside me, closer this time. You always covered for me, he said quietly, even when you shouldn't have. I didn't answer. After a moment, he added, I don't want that anymore. I want to see things as they are, even when it's uncomfortable. That mattered, more than any apology. When we finished, he stood and looked at the yard. It's coming back, he said. It was always here, it just needed space to breathe. He nodded. Can we do this again next week? I looked at him. Do you want to? Yes, he said. I do. That afternoon, I wore a dress I hadn't touched in years, pale green, soft cotton. I sat by the window with a notebook. On the first page, I wrote, Today, my son worked beside me not because he had to, but because he wanted to. There is a difference between being needed and being valued. I am learning it late, but I am learning it. Later, Lucy called. I saw Dad's shoes in the garage, she teased. Muddy. I said. He helped in the garden. A pause. Good, she said. I think he needed that. So did I. Grandma, she said before hanging up, I think you're becoming someone new. I smiled. No, I think I'm becoming someone I used to be, before I forgot myself. Monday brought quiet purpose. In the attic, I found a box labeled Jeff, School. Inside, certificates, drawings, a Pinewood Derby car. One picture showed 3 figures holding hands, me, Jeff, and Harold, drawn in even after he was gone. Children draw what they miss. At the bottom, I found a card, no date, just, thanks for everything, Mom. I know I don't say it enough. I held it carefully. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Later, Miriam called about a legal aid talk. I didn't need advice, but I appreciated being seen as a person again. That afternoon, I opened the trust folder. Everything was clear. Lucy's name, firm, intentional. But something was missing. Not legal, personal. I called Gerald, my lawyer. I'd like to add a letter, I said. Not legal, just something she'll read one day. When you're ready, he replied. So I wrote, You have my name, my voice, my quiet strength. This legacy is not a burden, it is a reminder. You saw me whole when others only saw what I could give. Choose love that costs nothing, set boundaries where love demands payment, and never forget, you were my turning point. I signed it with my full name, not Mom, not Grandma, just me. That night, I sat by the window again, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. No candle this time. No pen. Just the sound of wind moving gently through the trees, and a feeling I hadn't known in years. Something steady. Something certain. Not the kind that lets go, but the kind that moves forward. Outside, the garden had grown wild and green, exactly the way I liked it. A little tangled, a little stubborn, but alive. Tuesday arrived softly, wrapped in pale skies and a breeze that carried the scent of lilac and something older, like a memory you didn't realize you still held. I woke early, not from restlessness this time, but from something quieter. Readiness. There was nothing I had to do, and yet I dressed with care. A long skirt, a pale blouse, small earrings I hadn't worn since Lucy's middle school graduation. I was standing by the window sipping my coffee when the doorbell rang. Not a visitor this time, a delivery. A small box, my name on it, no note. I brought it inside and set it on the table, opening it slowly, almost carefully, as if whatever was inside deserved gentleness. It was a photograph, framed. Jeff, maybe 10 years old, sitting on my lap, both of us mid-laugh. A real laugh, not posed, not careful. I didn't remember the photo being taken, but I remembered the moment. The way he leaned into me like he believed without question that I could fix everything. Beneath the frame was a folded piece of paper. I opened it. Found this in a drawer I hadn't touched in years. I wanted you to have it. Not because it makes up for anything, just because it's real. And I think we both need real. No signature. Just that. I sat there for a long time, the photo resting in my lap, my fingers curled around the frame as though it might break if I held it any differently. I didn't cry, but my breath caught once, and I let it. Later that day, I decided to make dinner, not because anyone was coming, not to prove anything, just for the quiet joy of it. I roasted chicken, made biscuits from scratch, even pulled out the preserves I'd been saving for years. The house filled with warmth, the kind that feels like something inside you is slowly healing. At 5, the phone rang. "Hey," Jeff said. A pause. Lucy and I were wondering, would it be all right if we stopped by? Just for a bit. We won't stay long. I looked at the 2 place settings already on the table, then at the pot on the stove. "You'll stay for dinner. I've made too much." Another pause. Then softly, "Okay, thank you." They arrived an hour later, each carrying something. Jeff brought a basket of fresh herbs. Lucy handed me a notebook, her cheeks slightly pink. "I've started writing about you. Not as a character, but as a presence, a constant." I didn't know what to say, so I simply held it. Dinner was simple, quiet, good. We didn't talk about the will or money or the long shadows that had once stretched between us. Instead, we talked about food, books, the garden. Jeff asked how I made the biscuits so light. I smiled. "Cold butter," I told him, "and not overthinking." Afterward, Lucy helped with the dishes, humming softly to herself. Jeff stepped out onto the porch. When I joined him, he was standing there with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the yard. "You ever think," he said slowly, "that maybe we both forgot how to reach for each other?" I didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "We didn't forget. We just got tired of reaching without being met." He nodded. "I want to be better at that." "You are, Jeff. You're starting to be." He turned towards me, something softer in his eyes, something close to peace. He said, "I know I've lost things, and I know I don't get to claim them back just because I've changed my mind, but if you ever feel like there's room again, a breath, I'd be grateful." I looked at him. This man, grown, complicated, who I once bathed, fed, defended, and eventually learned to step away from. "There's room," I said, "but not the kind you fill by accident." He held my gaze. "The kind you earn," I continued, "by staying." He nodded. Before they left, Lucy hugged me the way she always did, whole, full, without hesitation. Jeff hugged me too, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't stiff, it wasn't careful, it was a son's hug. After the door closed, I stood in the kitchen, the warmth of the evening still lingering in the air. I picked up Lucy's notebook and opened it. She is not a symbol. She is not a ghost. She is the breath between generations, the silence that holds the weight, and the hand that never dropped the thread. I closed the book, my heart full in a way I hadn't felt in decades. Tomorrow I would walk to the post office. I had a letter for Gerald. Not to undo anything, just to add one small clause. In case he truly comes home, not just to visit but to stay, I would like to leave the door unlocked. Wednesday morning came with sunlight already spilling across the floor. No alarms, no plans, just a full breath and the quiet rhythm of my own footsteps moving through the house. I opened the windows, changed the linens, watered the lilies. It felt like a ceremony, even if no one else would have called it that. By mid-morning, I walked to the post office with the letter in hand. A final adjustment, not a reversal, not forgiveness, just possibility. The clerk behind the counter was young, cheerful. "Do you need tracking?" he asked. I smiled gently. "No," I said. "Not everything needs to be watched. Some things you just send and trust they'll arrive." On the way home, I stopped at the corner cafe. I hadn't sat there in years. The waitress didn't recognize me, but she smiled kindly when I ordered. I took my tea outside, sitting beneath a faded green awning, watching the world pass by. At the next table, two women, about my age, talked quietly. One mentioned her daughter, the other her bad knee. I listened not out of curiosity, but because there was something sacred in it. Women our age taking up space without apology. There was something holy about that. Back home, I changed into my gardening clothes and stepped into the yard. Everything was blooming now. Not neatly, not perfectly, but fully. The hydrangeas had opened wide. The lilies swayed in the breeze like they'd been waiting to be noticed. I knelt beside them, pressing my hands into the soil. I thought of all the years I had given, all the ways I had been quietly erased. The dinners made without thanks, the silences I swallowed, the moments I waited for calls that never came. And then I thought of Lucy, her laughter, her notebook, her presence. I thought of Jeff, not as the boy I raised, but as the man he was trying to become. And finally, I thought of me, not a background character, not an obligation, but a woman who had reclaimed herself in the second act of her life. The sun rested warm against my back. I didn't feel old. I felt rooted. That afternoon, I baked a cake. Simple, vanilla, nothing fancy. I frosted it with what I had and wrote one word across the top using a line of blueberries. Still. Because I was still here, still becoming, still enough. That evening, I set the table for one. Not out of loneliness, but out of celebration.
I lit a candle, served myself a slice, and opened my notebook one last time. There comes a moment when you stop asking to be seen and begin seeing yourself. I am no one's second thought. I am not background music in someone else's life. I am the voice that kept singing even when the room went quiet. And to anyone reading this, if they forget you, remember yourself. If they love you only when you are useful, step back. If you have poured into others until you are empty, sit, rest, refill. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are not done. You are still. And if this story held something true for you, share it. Send it to the woman who needs to remember who she is. Leave a comment. Tag a friend. Let someone else feel seen. Because maybe